Jesus said, "Men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed." Maybe that's why terrorists love tunnels so much. With the growing sophistication of surveillance technology in the United States and Israel, above ground, terrorist deeds will be exposed. You know about the Hamas tunnels into Israel and about the vast tunnel complex under Gaza. But did you know that since the new regime took over in Egypt last year, they have found 1,200 tunnels beneath their border with Gaza? There's also a threat beneath Israel's borders with Lebanon. WorldNet Daily's Aaron Klein wrote last week about the Hezbollah tunnels. The Shiite terrorist organization is known for its vast, sophisticated tunnel networks in Lebanon. Indeed, Hezbollah taught Hamas its tunnel warfare tactics and helped supervise the construction of its networks. Hezbollah's chief ally is Iran. Should Israel remain occupied in a battle with tunnel terrorists, Iran would be the main beneficiary. It might give Iran time to complete its nuclear weapons program without Israeli interference. Another one of Hezbollah's few friends is North Korea, known to have a vast network of tunnels beneath the demilitarized zone with South Korea. But it all comes much closer to home than that. In 2011, a federal grand jury in the United States indicted Aman Juma for distributing cocaine and laundering money. He is part of a large Lebanese community in Mexico and Central America. He is a known associate of both Hezbollah and Los Zetas drug cartel. We have known for years of a significant Hezbollah presence south of the U.S. border. Because of its cash, its international drug and weapons connection, and its ability to launder money, Hezbollah has made itself an ally of existing drug cartels. Whether we intentionally let them in or not, terrorists crossing our southern border now seems inevitable. We don't know how many Islamic terrorists are already in the United States. We don't know if any came in during the recent influx. On the other hand, we know they're there, so why wouldn't they come here? We've seen lots of drug tunnels and human trafficking tunnels underneath the U.S.-Mexican border. Some had rails, lights, wooden supports, and ventilation, but none have been as sophisticated as the Hezbollah tunnels. Mexican tunnels are usually no more than 70 feet deep and a half-mile long. Hamas tunnels, however, were as much as 120 feet deep, over 3 miles long, and large enough to drive motorized vehicles through. Hamas tunnels were capable of supporting offensive military operations. The Border Patrol hasn't found anything as sophisticated as that. That may be because they don't exist, or it may be because the Border Patrol isn't looking for anything quite so sophisticated. If Hezbollah has or will have tunnels under the U.S.-Mexico border, they can get men and weapons into the United States. You can't easily buy bomb-making materials here without being noticed. But if you have a tunnel or tunnels 100 feet below the desert, you can get anything you want across that border, including weapons of mass destruction. Terror tunnels often extend for miles. The border's vast length already makes it next to impossible to guard. Imagine trying to patrol the entire 1,900-mile length while watching for small, well-camouflaged openings, not just along the fence, but for several miles inland. All told, the border crisis may be even worse than we dared think. ISIS is an Islamic suicide cult obsessed with sex and death. On video, we see them constantly repeat mantras about the glory of dying for Islam and encouraging warriors with shouts about the virgins waiting for them in paradise. ISIS moves like a great plague, devouring people, land, cultures, and traditions wherever it goes. It has grown remarkably rich, taking banks, seizing oil fields, and otherwise stealing from the vanquished. It has repeatedly defeated the Iraqi army. It recently defeated well-regarded Kurdish fighters while simultaneously joining in an attack against Lebanon on the opposite side of its sphere of influence, all while continuing to fight in Syria. It has gone under several names, reflecting its leader's growing ambition and ever-inflating view of himself. At first, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi called his group Al-Qaeda in Iraq, then the Islamic State of Iraq, then the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, then the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. Now he's given them a new name, simply the Islamic State. His goal is to create a single caliphate encompassing the entire world. The word caliph comes from a word meaning successor. In this case, a successor to Muhammad. Theoretically, a caliph rules all Muslims with the authority of Muhammad. A caliphate, then, is far more than a regional Islamic group or even a Muslim country. It is, or intends to be, a worldwide entity. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi proclaims himself to be the new caliph. Accordingly, he now says he's a direct descendant of Muhammad. Though rarely seen, there are only 2 known photos of the man. His followers swear allegiance to him personally and treat him with idolatrous reverence. Time magazine calls him the world's most dangerous man. ISIS radicalizes Muslims and converts them from other religions at the point of the sword. Their fighters feel no compunction regarding human life. They slaughter Shiite men and moderates of all kinds. In one day, in late July, they executed 1,500 captured Iraqi soldiers. They regard the Yazidi people as devil worshippers. Yazidis do not evangelize because if you were not born into their tribe, which they believe descended from Adam only and not Adam and Eve, like the rest of humanity, you cannot become one of them. I'm sorry for the darkness in which they live. Still, outside of their group, they're no threat to others. But ISIS needs little excuse to murder, rape, and pillage. They drove 40,000 of them into the barren mountains where many died of starvation and dehydration, including many children. ISIS actually murdered more than 500 Yazidis. It was to this genocidal outrage that President Obama finally decided to respond with airdrops of bottled water and dried food and limited pinpoint airstrikes. It's hard to fathom the level of evil they regularly exhibit. Iraq's Minister for Human Rights, Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, said that ISIS had buried alive some of its victims, including women and children. He charged that more than 300 women had been captured as sex slaves for ISIS. They live in a world where spoils go to the most violent, and to them, the spoils of war include women. In the new town charter of Mosul, they demanded that all women, married or not, make themselves sexually available to ISIS fighters. By doing this, they said the women could cleanse themselves, but I'll bet not one of them felt cleansed after being raped by those monsters. To understand the severity of the present dilemma, look at a map of the Middle East. ISIS controls the area from the east of the Euphrates River across northern Syria into northern Iraq, from Mosul to the doorstep of Baghdad. Only the Kurds keep them from full control of northern Iraq. The only thing between ISIS and Israel is Syria, and ISIS is battling to take the rest of Syria. South of Syria is Jordan, a poor country without a great military, but strategically important because it's a Muslim country which has a peace treaty with Israel and solid friendship with the United States. Should Syria fall, U.S. allied Jordan would be easy pickings. One of ISIS' advantages is that wherever there is a strong Sunni Muslim population, There's a ready-made fifth column of radical Muslims waiting to be activated and energized. That's certainly the case in Jordan, where the government of King Abdullah is already tenuous. Just to the north of Israel is Lebanon, where ISIS attacked last week. Should ISIS gain any traction in Lebanon, Hezbollah, which has been keeping ISIS from defeating Bashar al-Assad's government in Syria, would have to go back to Lebanon and shore up their home front. That would put Assad's Syrian government at risk. Assad is not a good guy, and a lot of Americans long to see him in his downfall. But horrible as Assad is, he is far better than ISIS. And as we have seen, the corrupt and tenuous government remaining in Iraq keeps growing more vulnerable. ISIS already controls the central Iraqi cities of Ramadi and Fallujah, going right up to the outskirts of Baghdad. Should the capital fall, nothing would stop ISIS from taking control of the rest of Iraq, including the oil-rich southern region. We already know how quickly forces from Iraq can take Kuwait. President George H.W. Bush once mobilized the world to drive Saddam Hussein from Kuwait. Can you imagine Barack Obama doing that? No one else can either. And that perception is a huge problem. If Iraq and Kuwait fall into ISIS' hands, the world will transform in a day. Would the U.S. allow the Gulf states of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and Oman and Yemen to fall? If Russia took the side of ISIS, and it might, would Barack Obama be willing to fight? With these nations involved, it starts looking like a world war. Does the president have what that might take to lead America into a just war to save the world? He can't run again, so this isn't politics, just a simple question. Is it in him to fight if we perceive any risk at all? We know that ISIS plans to take the oil riches of the world and use them to destroy the West. Whose side would China take? The world runs on oil, and should ISIS gain control of the Middle Eastern oil at a significant level, it would instantly vault the group to the status of world power. By then, Iran would have nuclear weapons. And if threatened by this all-consuming Sunni army, wouldn't the Shias of Iran be willing to pull the nuclear trigger and go to war? Their brand of Islam looks forward to an apocalypse that will bring about their version of heaven on earth. They would count it a privilege to be the instigators of the apocalypse that would do that. I'm not predicting these things. I'm trying to show that stopping ISIS now is an urgent matter of national security for the United States. There's no nation of Kurdistan. It is simply a region that overlaps parts of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey borders. There is no nation, but there certainly should be. The United States has always resisted the idea because it wanted to appease the governments in Iraq and Turkey. The Kurds in eastern Turkey want independence. An actual nation of Kurdistan just south of the Turkish border might create even more unrest among Turkey's Kurdish population. For the same reason, Turkey doesn't want the United States to arm the Kurds. It might make them a threat to Turkey in the future. Until this week, the United States has refused to aid the Kurds except by going through Baghdad. But since last year, the predominantly Shia government in Baghdad has refused to send anything to the Kurds. They're fearful, just like Turkey. Ironically, the only thing keeping ISIS occupied in the north instead of marching on Baghdad is the Peshmerga, as the fighting force of the Kurds is known. And the only thing between Turkey and ISIS is Kurdistan. Finally, senior U.S. officials announced on Monday that the United States would begin to send arms directly to the Kurds, and Iraq and Turkey should thank them for it. ISIS has tons of weapons and other war materials captured from U.S. armed Iraqi soldiers who fled. The Kurds have no weapons to match them, yet they are fiercely pro-American. They're well-organized and courageous fighters. They've been losing battles to ISIS because, as Fox News analyst Charles Krauthammer said, they're essentially using javelins and harpoons. They're the world's best bet for stopping ISIS before it turns into something huge that will involve everyone. The president has already ruled out the use of U.S. ground forces, but it takes ground forces to get the job done. The Iraqi military will be on the ground, but it has proven weak and untrustworthy. The Kurds have been valiant warriors, but need help. I believe we should fully arm them and give them all the air support they need, not the measly pinpoint strikes the president has authorized. President Obama has been looking for moderate Muslims. The Kurds are as moderate as Muslims get. They are mostly Sunni Muslim, but other Kurds are Shiites, Christians, and Jews, and yet amazingly, they all get along with the Kurds. You don't find that in any other Muslim-ruled group. Most Kurdish Christians are recent converts. They're evangelical, and so far, they seem welcome in the diverse community. When you look at images of the refugees in Kurdistan, it's helpful to look not just at the people, but into the background. You see them gathered in a massive, well-designed, and potentially beautiful unfinished buildings. That's part of a building boom in Kurdistan. In other shots, you see large, well-maintained and landscaped highways. The Kurds have successfully created a thriving economy. Most Americans are not opposed to military action when it's needed, as long as it's only military action, not endless nation building. The Kurds are successfully building their own nation. They need weapons, air support, and that's it. Until last week, the United States refused to do anything to stop ISIS. The president wanted to use fear of ISIS as a way to influence internal Iraqi politics. He doesn't think the Shia government has been inclusive enough. That's rather ironic coming from a president whose signature accomplishment, Obamacare, passed Congress in 2010 without a single Republican vote. ISIS has thrived in part because it has been treated by the Obama administration as if it were a rightfully aggrieved political party and not a terror army bent on subjugating the world to its will. President Obama, in announcing the bombing and relief efforts, said, once Iraq has a new government, the United States will work with it and other countries in the region to provide increased support to deal with this humanitarian crisis and counter-terrorism challenge. Secretary of State John Kerry said, the only durable way to stop ISIL is for Iraq real leaders to unite and form an inclusive government as rapidly as possible. But here's the deal, folks. Inclusiveness doesn't matter to ISIS. They don't want to be a place at the table in Iraq's government. They're building a caliphate. They want their man to rule the world. To us, this is not a holy war, but to them, it is. That means that the premise of this administration is wrong. They think it's about politics, but it is so much more than that. Christians in America need to remember Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 through 13. Our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the full armor of God, that you may be able to resist in the evil day. In the Hall of Fame, in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, for those who showed great examples of faith, the writer tells about the faith of various individuals in the Old Testament, then metaphorically throws up his hands. He says, there's too much to say, too many stories to tell. He said the time would fail him to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets. He didn't even face the time constraints of a modern television program, but he perfectly expresses how I've been feeling lately. To use the words of Scripture, time would fail me to tell of a new outbreak of pestilence, with the Ebola virus putting the world on alert. The breathtaking rise in the persecution and displacement and genocide of Christians around the world. The return of George W. Bush's axis of evil as Iraq goes back into the bad guy column with Iran and North Korea. And the return of Ronald Reagan's evil empire, an expression he used to describe the Soviet Union. I don't have the time to talk about the new belligerence of Vladimir Putin and the reckless gamesmanship he has displayed in just the last few days in his personal war with Barack Obama. Some of you remember when the majority of the human race lived less than a half an hour away from nuclear annihilation. Well, here we go again. We're there again. The world seems less safe than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and most Americans don't even know it. ISIS matters. We don't know yet if the present developments are a big step or a small one, but we already know the direction it's heading, toward Armageddon. When you hear a report like this, it's easy to fret. Fox News commentator Sean Hannity often quotes from John 14, where Jesus said, "Let not your heart be troubled." That's good advice, and I appreciate anyone willing to quote Scripture on a national television show. But it's good to remember that after Jesus gave his admonition, he explained why we don't need to let our hearts be troubled. He gave us something to build our hope on. He said, "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." In John 16, verse 33, Jesus gave a dire prophecy, then coupled it with wonderful news. In this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Followers of Jesus have the best retirement plan the world has to offer. If you are a follower of Jesus, then you have a future so bright and golden, words can't express it. And if you aren't a follower of Jesus, you can be right now. Even in troubled times, you can know the joy and peace of resting easy in the one who has overcome the world. You know, as I said in my book, Combat Faith, it says something that I want to leave you with. It says, "Therefore, let us fear, lest while a promise remains of entering into his rest, any one of you should seem to have come short of it. For indeed, we had good news preached to us, just as they also, but the word heard did not profit them because it was not united by faith in those who heard." This is talking about the Israelites when they were coming out of Egypt and they were at the Red Sea, and they continued in it. You see, God said we should fear him, and the other thing he says in the Word of God is you should fear failing to claim his promises that were given to you to give you peace and rest in time of the worst things going on in the world. Therefore, learn the promises that account for helping you in whatever you need and are experiencing. Don't fail to claim the promises of God and counting them as more real than the things you see with your eyes and hear with your ears. Claim those promises. Learn them. You're going to need them. Well, that's it for the night, folks. And God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470-470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1